Oh my goodness. Welcome to another episode of The Ultimate Creative. I am your host, Emily Milling, and today I have with me...
Craggs.
Karen, Craggs, Global Conscious Equality Expert, the Oprah of Global Conscious Equality. That's who she is. I'm so excited you're here today to talk to us about how small businesses and entrepreneurs can start to weave in conscious equality into the fabric of their businesses and give us some amazing insights and tips and things that you've learned along the way to help us really do the work and be better allies and work on our allyship. So without further ado, Karen, tell us who you are. Tell us the whole Karen journey and everything that has led you to where you are right now.
Oh my gosh, you just opened a whole can of worms there. So thank you for having me, Emily. It's so great to be on your podcast and learning from you about how to do my own podcast. So I'm Karen. I'm originally from Kenya, East Africa, and I live in Canada, and I have my family in Canada. It's been about over 20 years. And my story actually begins as a young person growing up in a very multicultural home. So my dad was white from a small town called Darlington in England, and he came to Africa with the colonial government, the British government, to build the railways and stayed. He's now 93 and he's still in Africa. And he married my mom, who's South Asian. She's Gujarati. For those of you who speak Gujarati, Kemcho. And so they had this amazing marriage between the two of them. And then they adopted my brother, who is actually Black Kenyan. And so I grew up in a very multicultural home, and it was crazy. I mean, my mom was a pure vegetarian, and my dad owned the best steakhouse in town. And for a Jane to be married to somebody who eats cows, like, you couldn't do a worse thing, right? But what I learned growing up in that home was that it's possible, if there's a will, there's a way to create a space that's inclusive, that's supportive of differences, and that celebrates who we are in all our diversity. And to me, that was the norm. Like, that was just the way life was, until I started noticing every time we would leave home and go to, visit my family, who are all Indian in Kenya, or going into community spaces, I would notice that people would treat one of us differently. Either it was my dad because he was white, or it was my mom because she was brown, or it was my brother because he was Black. And I started to notice how unfair the world really was. And the thing that hurt me most was watching my brother get the brunt of it, because I belonged. So in the same spaces that I belonged, he did not belong. And people made it very clear that he didn't belong. And so, looking back, I was about 6 when my mother asked me to go and get a piece of pie or something for my brother. And I went into the kitchen, and without knowing it, I gave him a bigger piece. I mean, I thought about it and I decided to give him the bigger piece. And then I started doing that more often. And looking back now, I realized that what I was practicing was the principle of equity, which is redistribution of resources to take into account where people are and what's going on with them. And so I was practicing this idea of being fair and what that looked like for me as a kid. But like, fast forward, all this time later, I'm now in my 40s. I've spent 20 years working globally on equality issues around the world. I have worked on gender equality, on accessibility. Right now, I'm supporting a lot of organizations on anti-racism work. And this is deeply personal to me, because I saw what's possible, and I also saw what's at stake in the world when we don't do this work intentionally. And so, my goal through my career, through my company, which is Conscious Equality Incorporated, has been to bring people together and to create safe spaces for us to be authentic about what our fears are, what we were born with and taught that we may not, necessarily agree with right now, and helping people see how to change.
That's so amazing. I think I really love that at such a young age, you were able to see this as well. You were able to recognize a pattern, and you were able to find a way to make it better for your brother. And of course, when it's your family member, it's much easier to think about, I don't want this bad thing to happen to my family member. I'm wondering how you apply this in the work that you do with the companies that you work with. How do you bring that sort of innocent desire for justice and equity into a grown-up world where it's like there's so many different pressures everywhere all over the place, and like you have to answer to specific people to get a certain amount of money, like that kind of how do you bring that youthful essence, I guess, of like total innocence and just wanting people to feel good and feel treated fairly into this type of environment?
Wow, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think here's the thing that the world is broken up into different groups of people. So if we look at the work I do in international development, which is very much about taking Canadian funding and international funding and creating projects around anti-poverty, etc., in other parts of the world, then the objective there is to do good, right? So the whole point of development is to do good, and built inside of that needs to be the recognition that we're not all starting from the same place. We have different risk factors, we have different barriers affecting us. And so, in order to do good, whether it's developing a school or a hospital, we have to recognize those differences and build around them and build and take them into account. And so, when I do the work I do internationally, it's often about, helping people recognize that that needs to be part of the process, and helping them see that when we do it that way, we have much better outcomes in communities and in households and societies. So that's the work I do internationally. But when I look at what's happening in Canada with institutions, large corporations like CIBC Bank, where I worked, or even smaller institutions, businesses owned by people like you and me, what I'm seeing right now is a real shift. So in the past, I felt like I was knocking on the door, asking people to wake up. They didn't see this as an issue. They weren't interested. It wasn't something that was motivating them. But right now, because of what's happened with George Floyd and all the other individuals who've been, unfairly treated and murdered in the process, there's a real global awakening. And so what's changed for me at the moment is people are saying, oh my gosh, this is a real issue. I may not have recognized it before, but now that I do, I want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And so, what's missing for them is the language, the tools, the strategies that they can use, and that's where I come in. So I feel like I'm doing less to convince people that this work is important, and I'm doing more to help them understand. Now that I'm awake, where do I go next? What are my first, second, third steps around this work?
And so what are, like, traditionally, or not traditionally, but maybe recently, what are the types of businesses that you've been working with the most?
So it ranges. I mean, and that's one of the things that I love about the way I've set my company up. Because I've done global work across multiple sectors and at different levels, I can work with pretty much anyone. So I'm working with university institutions that have multiple layers to them, and they're quite complex. I'm working with corporations who have offices all over Canada and the US. I'm working with individuals who are saying, I have my own company. I'm a one-person show, but I want to get this right. Maybe I'm doing a yoga studio or Pilates, or I'm, offering consulting support. How do I make sure that I'm not creating harm or marginalizing people in the way I do my business? And so the range of people that I partner with is pretty, pretty diverse. And, one of the conversations I had recently was with a government agency that was saying, how do we bring this anti-oppression, anti-racism lens into how we do our policy making and our programmatic work for Canadians? So I will work with anyone who wants to do this work right. And that's my main criteria. Like, when I'm looking at who I want to support, if you come to me and you're just simply looking to tick a box and get this work over quickly and just kind of cover your bases, then I screen those people out, because I know from years of experience that when you rush and don't do this work properly, you actually create new issues and make things worse for people.
Yeah, I mean, it's like with anything, you have to want to do the work. You have to want to be dedicated to it. It's great that people are finally, like you're saying, waking up and realizing that this has always been important work to do. Maybe you could get a little bit into why you're passionate about working with the people that do want to do the work. Like, what is it that's motivating you to work with these companies? How do you, like, when you talk about screening them out, what are the ones that you do work with? What is it that makes you really energized about working with them?
Well, okay, so having an interest and a willingness to do things right and to look at your company and say, what could we do differently? I mean, that's just exciting because, then we're playing in the space of possibility. And I just love working with organizations that are open to it. Now, there's a framework that I use to help people understand how to do this work. And one is called integration, where we say, I'm doing my business as usual. I'm running things the way I've always run them. I'm hiring people the way I've always hired them. I'm doing marketing the way I've always done it. I'm offering the same services at the same price point that I am. Can you help me figure out what small actions I can take to be more inclusive inside of that existing framework? And then there's another framework, which is where transformation happens, and that's the space I love to play in. And that framework is called mainstreaming. And so mainstreaming is not doing business as usual. Mainstreaming is all about transforming the way we do things by being open to redesigning everything, sometimes starting over from scratch. And so, what's exciting for me is when I help companies understand that they come in saying, we'd like to do something, and they're thinking more in terms of integration. So, we don't want too much change. But then when I understand their motivation and where they really want to land and the kind of impact they can have, and I get buy-in for that, then we start talking about transformation. Then we look at, oh my gosh, how do we create a whole brand new program that's going to support the Black community? How do we, open a whole new internship program that we never even had for marginalized individuals? How do we, restructure our partnership framework so that people who previously would drop out and not even make it to partnership level now have an opportunity to contribute at that level and benefit? And so it's not a one or the other. It's actually a blend of the two. But what's amazing is when I have organizations like, I'll take CIBC, for example, and I worked with them for 10 months last year. They were talking about accessibility, and they had this whole new building that they're creating at Union. It's called CIBC Square at Union Station in Toronto. And they could have just taken a building and moved people into that building. But when they reached out to me, they were saying, we want to redesign what it means to have an experience with this organization, right from the bathrooms to the elevators to the furniture. And we want accessibility to be so built in that anybody with any kind of accessibility need would walk into the organization or the building and think, wow, like this place, they thought of me. They literally thought of me when they designed this place. And that is quite a task. It's a huge task if you think about it, kind of identifying all the different needs and then working backwards to say, well, what does this mean for the space in terms of doors, in terms of elevators, in terms of washroom design, in terms of furniture, and then putting the money behind it to make those changes happen. But what the result is going to be when they finally open is a best in class, game changing experience for anyone who wants to work in a financial institution or be served by one. And you were asking me what's the motivation. The motivation is there's real people at stake. There's real lives who are going to be improved from this work. And if I just take CIBC alone as an example, they get to not only become best in class for their own experience, but they set a standard that other institutions want to follow. So when I work with one organization and get them to a certain place, they become the North Star for everybody else around them. And all of a sudden, those excuses of we don't have expertise, we didn't know how to do it, we don't have budget, they start dissolving because they see an institution who's done it right. And so I feel like I'm creating ripple effects at a global scale by working with those disruptors who are willing to change the game, do things differently, and understand that not only are they doing good for other people, but they can leverage it for their own reputation and for standing out in the sector that they're in and making a difference that way
Yeah,
too.
the ability to implement this for such a ginormous company. And if you're listening in America, CIBC is a Canadian bank. So, or in America or anywhere else in the world, I guess. So this is kind of a big deal, to have them be able to set this example in right downtown Toronto, where typically we have a lot of international travelers who are looking for that best in class type of example to look towards. So a large company is able to implement this kind of thing because they do have the budget and they do have mandates for this. What about smaller businesses that obviously, like, we're careful with where we want to put our money, but I would say we're all a lot of us, maybe not all of us, a lot of us are leaning towards putting our money into places that do create these types of shifts, that do support moving towards a more equitable state of being. What are some things, though, that you think small businesses can do? Because obviously, like, I work from home. My office is in my living room. I'm not necessarily creating something accessible. The only thing that I can think of for me for accessibility would be my website has alt text on it, and I'm making it easy to for other people to access who use their computers differently than people who have vision, for example. What are some things that you think most small businesses should be doing or should be spending a part of their budget on in order to support this global movement towards equity?
Well, okay, so the number one thing I would say is, recognize that it doesn't matter what sector or field you're in, there is always more you can do to be conscious about how you address equality issues. And I speak about that generally because I feel like, a lot of organizations pick one issue, like they'll pick gender equality, or they'll pick accessibility, or they'll pick the Black community, and then they'll just focus in on that. And I feel like there's so much that we need to do that is intersectional, because there's so many overlapping factors here. And so that would be one thing, is recognizing that there's many issues on many fronts that we can work on, and that there's always things we can do to improve. The other thing is that recognizing that there are things we can do that don't require funds. So a lot of my clients come to me and they say, well, we want you to work with us. We want you to do this one training, but we don't have the budget for all these other things you recommended. And so budget is a very important piece. This work should not be done without putting the money behind it, because you're limited in terms of the kinds of impact you can have. However, not having funding should not be an excuse for not doing things better. And I'll give you a very easy example for one thing that companies have done, big and small, that have made a difference. And that is when they're hiring for a new position. So let's say you're hiring somebody as a consultant to support you in some way. People often ask questions about their expertise. So, where did you go to school? How many years experience do you have doing your copywriting or whatever it is? But the question that they don't ask is around values. And so, have you had experience or training around equality issues? What is your perspective on this? How would you treat a person in a certain situation? And these things are really important, because as I found with one organization that I was working with for 3.5 years, simply by implementing questions around values and screening out individuals who did not align with those values, we turned the entire organizational culture around. It wasn't the training that turned the culture around. It was hiring people who already believed in this work. And so similarly, when I work with clients, I work with clients who have this as a core value and who really care about this. And it makes a huge difference, because you can train somebody who cares about this and doesn't know how to do it. But to bring somebody on board who doesn't care about this at all, and then try and get them to bring in this new lens and look at it from a different perspective, is a much more difficult task. And it requires more resources to do.
Yeah.
So that would be one thing, is work with people who care about this, even if they're just copywriters or marketing people, or people like you who help with learning how to do podcasts. And I mean, if I take the podcast example, so there's all the things you mentioned around how do I make what I'm producing accessible to different individuals, but then there's also, what stories am I telling? What are the topics that we're talking about? Have I invited guests who come from different experiences and represent different populations? Am I offering this conversation on different platforms that maybe individuals don't have access to otherwise? What is the visual component of my work and how I present it? What are the languages that I'm offering this in? Is it only in English? Can I offer it in other languages? So there's so much you can do without changing the core function, or like the core service you're offering, and still enhancing it in ways that would just open the doors in such great ways. And I remember one advice, or one story I want to tell, is when I was working with Ryerson's community radio group. So they have an amazing team, really dedicated people. They do such incredible work developing the capacity of community voices to come and speak using the Ryerson radio station. And the traditional model for them was, individuals find out about us, they come to our station, we train them over volunteer hours, and then they come and they practice and they speak on whatever the topic is. So they get hands-on experience. But I said, if it's a community station, have you thought about taking the radio to the community? Like, why do they have to come to you? What happens when you take your unit or whatever it is and you set it up somewhere in the community during a community event and you capture these different voices and experiences? And they were like, oh, wow, I hadn't thought about that. So, so that, that's why you want to work with someone. Like, I often think that a lot of what I do is creative brainstorming. So I start with the assumption that there's lots that's possible. We just need to open our minds to it. And then I help people brainstorm about what that might look like.
And when you're doing these brainstorming activities, how do you point people in the right direction of the first step to take? Because I know it can be, like, honestly, like with anything that's new, right? It can be overwhelming. It can be difficult to wrap your head around how you're going to get from where you are now to where you really want to be. So what do you offer to people in terms of a first step? What's like the one thing that you think small businesses or even large businesses should be doing to get started with this work?
So I think we need to recognize that very few people have had the education and the background around this work. And so the number one thing you need to do is get in a course, but not just any course, because there's a lot that's available online. There's a lot that's available on Instagram. You can do a lot of self-reading. In fact, a lot of people have done that. They've gone and read Me and My White Fragility. They've gone and read so many other things. But what happens is, when you are doing that internal work by yourself, you're not engaging in a conversation. You don't know if you've got a concept wrong. You're not sure how it actually applies in practice. So the one thing that I tell all of the people who come to me and say, where do I start? Is I say, sign up for a program that is a blend of, here are the core concepts and principles and history you need to understand, and also leads you to practical solutions. So you're not learning for the sake of learning, you're learning with a purpose. And often the purpose is, what's my plan? And so last month, I delivered a 5-day program that did exactly that. We had a day on anti-racism principles. We had a day on allyship. What does allyship mean? And there are frameworks that people need to understand. And that, giving them those tools and those frameworks, helps them situate where they are. So they get to see, oh, I thought I was an ally, but in fact, based on this framework, oh my gosh, like, I'm just simply a performative standbyer. Like, I'm not really taking strategic action, right? So it helps you identify where you are and how much more work there is to be done, which is exciting, I would think. And then we look at, okay, what does that additional step look like? What are you going to do with this? And so over 5 days, I took my first group of people through that process, and the end result on the 5th day was incredible, because they presented back to the group what their plans were going to be, specific things that they were going to do, whether it was lowering the price of their program for people who can't pay for it, or offering scholarships, or creating partnerships with communities to offer a local version of what they're offering. There was just such incredible input that came in, and they all left with concrete plans. So you want to invest in the right type of learning, which is practical, which is oriented towards action, and which allows you to have interaction with somebody who can guide you and deepen your thinking. In other words, come work with me.
Yeah, I was going to say, when are you going to launch this program again?
Yeah, early August. I have my next round in early August. Yeah, I think it's around August 3rd.
You really make all of this so accessible, and it's sort of like the allyship piece. You put out an Instagram video that I watched about allyship, about the different types of allyship that there are. And like, I've always considered myself to be a good ally, but I didn't really know that there were different levels. And it turns out I think I'm the one that happens after the performative one, because I'm always yelling at people for being horrible to others. But the third level, what was the third level again? That's the one that I think I need to work towards actually being. What was the third level that you mentioned?
So there's the standbyer, the performative. So standbyer does nothing, just basically says, I'm a good person, I don't need to advertise it. Performative is, okay, let's forward that forward, so people know that I have a stand on this, but it really doesn't change anything. It just makes you feel better. Then there's the actual ally.
Okay.
And the ally is somebody who has an ongoing relationship and consistent action that develops trust with the other community. because
Mm-hmm.
it's who they are on a regular basis. And then there's the advocate and then the accomplice. So the advocate is someone like me who advocates on behalf of others using my voice, my
Mm-hmm.
space, my platform. And then accomplice is where you have skin in the game and you have something to lose because you're right there with them, you
Mm-hmm.
know, taking on people in your communities who are saying things and doing things that you can call on because you're also a person with power.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that really opened up my eyes a lot to what else I could be doing and what more I can be doing. I'm like terrified of going to protests, but I'm also terrified of going to any place with large crowds. So it's not
Yeah.
necessarily about like the fact that it is a protest. It's just I don't love being in giant crowds.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm,
my allyship tends to be more of a sharing things on Facebook and Instagram and then calling it out when I see it in my
mm-hmm,
community or
mm-hmm.
wherever it happens to be, extremely vocally, I will say, because it's always been a part of me that I'm like, I cannot handle when people are racist, awful people. And like
Mm-hmm.
Toronto is just a breeding ground for that. And I grew up in Oshawa. It's called the Dirty Schwa in our little subculture. It's disgusting there, but it's like it's just so white there. And even my family, the family that I don't speak to anymore, like
Mm.
grew up in this post-Nazi household. It was like bad situation. I
Mm-hmm.
don't speak to them anymore. But I can clearly remember my father saying to me, like, oh, you shouldn't be calling out racism because you know racists and that's bad to tell them that they're wrong. And I'm like, well, who is it? And he's like, well, it's someone at my workplace. And I'm like, well, who is it? And I named all of these different people. And I did not realize he was referring to himself and his parents. I
Mm.
can kind of understand, my Oma was in the Hitler Youth and she was totally brainwashed. However, he should have and still must figure that out. And I've washed my hands of him for the last 10 years or so, so I have no idea what's going on.
Mm.
But I do
Mm-hmm.
know that, like,
Mm-hmm.
if we are committed to this, and I think going back to how you felt about getting your brother a bigger piece of pie when you were a kid,
Mm-hmm.
that really resonated with me because that's always what I've felt. And maybe because I was bullied a lot as a kid as well, I'm like, we must stand up for each other regardless of what it
Yeah.
is. But it's like, how do you bring that innocence of like defending people because we all
Mm-hmm.
should feel good about our lives? Oh, that was a long tirade. And so if you've listened to this podcast before, you know that I don't usually get into super deep conversations, but it's the truth. And I do share that with a lot of people because I think it's important to know that, like,
Yeah.
if you are struggling with like talking to your family, and I know a lot of people are struggling with talking to their families right now about racism and about these old belief systems that just do not serve us and never actually have served us, it's really important to know that you can find resources. You can take Karen's program, for example, and learn
Mm-hmm.
how to have these conversations and to
Mm-hmm.
change the way that people are thinking. Like, that is a part that is incumbent upon all of us to do. And if we believe it, then we need to make it happen. So anyway, so that's my long rant.
So I want to talk about family for a second because
Mhm.
I often say that I started this work, like, of all the people that I would call racist, the person that really shocked me and made me go, I need to take a stand on this, is my dad,
Mm.
right? Because he came from colonial England in colonial times, is 93. He still lives in Africa. He still thinks that we're not all equal. He still says some pretty offensive things. And I remember, thinking, how is that possible? How is it that I love this man? I respect this man. He's a good human being. And yet there's this part of him that I absolutely hate. And what I
Mhm.
want people to understand is that racism is not a black and white thing. It's also not a simple thing. We are, most of us, good people, decent people, and we often say and do things that are unconsciously implanted from our childhood, from our history, whatever it is. And so part of the work is to slow down long enough to create spaces for us to examine, how is
Mm.
this showing up? How is this coming out in my language? How, for example, I ask people in my course to think about, when you were a child, what kind of music did you play at home? who showed up at your dinner parties, who are your parents' best friends, like who did you have play dates with, and that will tell you what your experience has been, like that invisible unconscious experience that
Yeah.
sends you cues about who is acceptable and who isn't.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the bigger piece here is, that we need to come to this work with compassion, which is why I created conscious equality, because we need to connect the head and the heart. And
Mm-hmm.
I learned through my dad, I learned a lot of important lessons about allyship, about equality work through my dad, because here was this person who was not essentially an evil person, but who had many faults, and who at some points wasn't willing to engage in the conversation with me because that was the way things were. And who the hell am I to judge him and teach him, right? I'm just his kid.
Mm-hmm.
But what I learned over time was, if I was willing to stop judging and to consider his life experience, and to consider the journey he was on, and to consider the pain that he's experienced, I could connect with him in a way that I couldn't when I was coming at him,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to coming beside him.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've had the most profound conversations. I mean, hey, it's been like 40 years of trying to figure him out, right? Like,
Yeah.
but I have found moments of pure, like moments of joy, moments where I've cried, moments where I've said, "Oh my gosh, like my dad sees the light."
Hmm.
And it's not that I'm trying to change who he is as a human being, it's that I'm trying to understand, because when I seek to understand him, then I have an access to so many other people who
Mm-hmm.
haven't even got people who are committed to having those conversations with them. Like most of us, especially Canadians, we're so invested in being polite that we don't
Mm-hmm.
want to be the bad person. We don't want to make people uncomfortable. We don't want to be the one to have that conversation. But it takes something to stay engaged in a relationship with someone who rubs you the wrong way,
Mm-hmm.
and to, try and understand them, and then to try and be committed enough to have those conversations. Because if you have them
Mm-hmm.
enough, eventually something will click and they'll go, yeah, you're right. Like, and a big thing for me is, we've all experienced oppression. I don't care if
Mm-hmm.
you're white, brown, yellow, orange, like we have all experienced what it's like to be othered. And so in a sense, there's that universal thread that connects all of us, right?
Yeah. I mean, 100%. I think if you're able to do that, and if you have the type of relationship that will support that, and there are no other factors. There are plenty of other
Yeah.
factors in my
Yeah.
relationship with my biological sperm donor, but if
Yeah.
you're able to
Yeah.
do that, that what a great thing, and what an awesome thing it is to really be a true empath and be compassionate and understand where people are coming from, because you're right, that is the only way that we can help people to see what the other side is, right? So
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about the podcast that you're planning to launch, and I want to hear your plans for this. We've been talking about this for the last couple of months. You took my course, Podcast Rocket, when I launched it the first time. You're going to take it again in the fall. So I want to hear
Yes.
what your plans are, because you have so much knowledge that I know people really need to hear. I know I need to hear it. I know so many people who want to understand this better, and so many people who want to incorporate more of this type of work into their businesses and into their lives. So tell me a little bit about what your plans are so far and where it's going.
All right. You're putting me on the spot because I've been avoiding nailing things down for a while. So so my podcast is going to be about conscious equality, and all the issues that that involves. So how it shows up in terms of accessibility, diversity and inclusion, anti-racism, gender equality. And it's going to be a blend of teaching, just like the conversation we're having now, like an interactive discussion with somebody, a guest, who's experienced something, or who's leading the work in organizations, or who's teaching others on how to do this. And so a blend of both talking about life experience and what people have gone through, and strategies that they've used to help move this work forward, but also like talking about some of the real challenges, and why are we stuck on this, why hasn't there been so much progress around women's rights and gender equality in the world, what is going on, and what would make the difference. So it's kind of a melting pot of conversations all around equality and social justice issues, and both a sharing of experiences, but also a place for you to reflect and hopefully learn things that you can apply.
Who do you think needs to hear this podcast? Who is, like, what is the person in your head? Who is this person? Who is the person that must hear it? Who's it for?
Now, I know the answer should not be everybody.
You're right. It should not.
So I would say anyone who's looking to take meaningful action in their business, in their company, in their organization, in their institution, like anyone who wants to actually address issues that they are helping to shape and form should take the podcast. How's that?
Take the program and listen to the podcast.
And the podcast, both.
Yes. And also follow you on Instagram because you have a lot of really great content. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you use your content marketing as well to spread more of your message out into the world. So just walk us through a couple of the strategies and the tactics that you use on Instagram specifically or otherwise. Like, you've done so many things in the last month or two. What is working really well for you right now? How are you using this to promote your business and your brand?
Yeah, so I think the first thing I would say is if you're not on Instagram, get an account on Instagram. You know, it took me a long time. I feel like I wasted a lot of time not being on there, but really it is a great platform for you to have access to influencers and to learn a lot. So you don't necessarily have to post, but for sure, if you don't have one, get on there and start learning how to use it. The second thing that I would say is that Instagram is all about visual and video, right? So you, as somebody who's promoting your services and business, you want to be comfortable speaking to people on video. And it has been a journey for me the last year and a half to go from, you won't believe this, but like a year and a half ago, I would not come on Zoom or anything else. I was like, no way. So, you know, that developing the self-confidence to be on camera. And of course, then you have all these questions around branding. So what are my colors? What am I wearing? You know, my presence, my language, all of that stuff is built into doing this effectively. And what I love that works for me is a blend of things. So I have pictures that talk about the work that I'm doing or, you know, something in my personal life, because I want people to know who I am, both inside the work and outside the work. And so I'm very committed as a mother. I love spending time with my 3 children. I have a husband who's also an activist and works on, people don't know this, but he actually works on equity issues in a school board. And he's probably the person I respect the most in the world because he does incredible work.
Wow.
And imagine that. You haven't even heard from him. I want to do a podcast with him, actually. He's pretty amazing. He blows my mind every time we talk about these things. So, you know, so I want people to know who I am through the Instagram stuff, with these stories and pictures. But then I also want to share content that teaches and educates, because by all measures, I'm an educator. That's what it comes down to. I show people the way and I teach people. And so I will do short videos that literally have one question and 3 points. Like, how do I answer that question with 3 points? And my 3 points are always focused on something that someone else can apply. So that's been really helpful for me to, you know, just listen as I'm working with different groups, to listen to what's the conversation we had. Is there something in that conversation I had today in my potential client meeting or in a staff meeting with someone else that would be relevant to others? And I share that in the form of a video. And then the last thing, of course, with Instagram is the stories. So the stories are great because I don't have to post something every day, but through the stories, I can tell you, who am I talking today? What is my client? You know, what am I working on? And you get a sense of how rich and diverse my work experience is. And also, if I'm on vacation, how I get to combine work and vacation, as you saw when I was at the cottage. That was a lot of fun. And, you know, at the end of the day, what I love about Instagram is you get to know who I am, like the whole me, right? As much as you can get that through social media. So yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's anything else you picked up that you thought was working from my strategies, but you know, that's great. I love that.
Yeah, well, I think what really draws me to your account generally, not just you as a person, but your account is your authenticity and your willingness to share what you know. I think a lot of people get nervous about sharing what they know because they're like, I must put this behind a paywall. But content marketing just really isn't about that, and podcasting isn't about that, and really as a strategy to bring new clients in, it makes more sense to share the quick tips, like the videos that you described, the allyship one specifically that always stands out to me. They're not super long videos, but they're very helpful and they really stick in your head. And so I know that when I'm thinking about equality or anything to do with equality generally, I know who I'm going to ask because I know that you are the expert. So I think you've done a really, really great job in establishing that on Instagram. Everyone should follow you. What's your handle on Instagram? Tell us now.
Aw.
I will drop it in the show notes, of course.
That's so cool. It's Karen_Craggs, Craggs.
Okay, so everyone follow Karen_Craggs. And I want to ask you too, so
And,
what else?
Oh, by the way, I'm the brown Karen, not the white Karen.
Okay.
Just had to throw that in.
That's fair. That's a fair point to make at this moment in time. Karens are having...
Yes.
They're having a moment.
Right? They're having a big moment, and I can't get away from it. I get all these forwards all the time about white Karen, right?
Oh my God.
And finally, I did a video, which is on my Instagram, about brown Karen helping white Karen.
That's really funny. I mean, like, the white Karen character is so easy to parody. Everybody does it. It's too fun. But, like, what is up with that haircut? Oh, God.
Honestly.
Put yourself in that position. But so I want to ask you then, just before we wrap up, I want to know where people should find you, what's coming up next for you, what are the things that you want to plug, and I'm going to put I'm going to put links to everything in here in the show notes. So if you're listening, you can get all of the links to this below. What are the big things coming up that you want to share with everyone?
Well, thank you so much for sharing my work with everyone. I think that's amazing. So yeah, I have my Conscious Equality in Business program. It's a 5-day program, 1 hour a day over 5 days. We cover concepts and then move right into action plans. That's the next round is in August, and then I'll do another one in September. So if you're interested, there'll be a link in my Instagram link there that you can find out more. I also do a lot of on-demand trainings and webinars. So if you're an organization or a community group that wants to have this conversation, you want training around it. Some of my clients are looking for actual long-term roadmaps.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to build a roadmap that is, more than just the training. I'm doing this really cool thing right now, which I'm promoting with companies and which is really working very well in this particular context. And that is a real-time conversation. So I send out just one link to everybody in the organization with one question, and everybody answers it. And within 15 minutes, I can tell you what are the top themes and issues that people are concerned about around anti-racism, around Black Lives Matter, around anything, whatever the topic is. And then we have a session, and the session is really around, okay, let's look at solutions for these things that people are really concerned about, the top 10 issues or whatever. So that can be on any topic, but it's amazing. It really creates authentic discussion and people feel heard. But I always caution those who want to do that if you're going to engage in a conversation with your staff about what their concerns are, what their feelings are, what issues they think you need to address, you must be ready to take action. You can't ask that question and then not take action, right? So that's really important for people to think about. My podcast is going to be coming out at some point.
Yay!
Yes, we've got to do some work on that, but the podcast is coming. I also have a channel on YouTube, which I post all my videos on. And I also post a lot of content on LinkedIn, if LinkedIn is your platform as well. And at the end of the day, I just want people to know that I'm here to help. So if you're dealing with a challenge, whether it's sexual harassment at work or toxic workplace environment or, anti-racism issues, I'm here to serve and I'm here to help. So reach out and let me help, because that's the amazing thing, right? There's so many people who want to try and figure this out on their own. But if you were sick and you had a problem, would you not go to the doctor?
Yeah.
Like, in the same way, if you're struggling with these issues and you don't know how to take action, come to me, or come to someone like me, because that's why we're here. We have this experience and this expertise for a reason. And, there's a perception that this is a nice thing to do and we should, wait for another time. And the truth is, a lot of organizations are thinking about this work in terms of a risk at the moment. So they're seeing themselves as being at a potential risk of being called out by individuals or communities who are, who are paying attention. But what they need to understand is this isn't a risk. This is actually the biggest opportunity you've ever had to create a conscious business and to walk the talk and to distinguish yourself from others in your sector by simply paying attention and taking action, right? So, I mean, this is the most exciting time from my perspective ever. And people just need to, reach out, get the help, and do the work.
Well, that's fantastic. You heard it here first. Actually, you didn't hear it here first at all. You've heard it in a million places. Check out everything that Karen is working on, and if you fall into this, if you are one of the people that absolutely feels a pull to start doing this work and start doing it properly, please reach out to Karen. Again, all of her contact info and everything will be listed in the show notes. And I'm so, so happy that you were able to join me on my podcast today, Karen. I really, really appreciate it. One final thought before we wrap up that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
Conscious equality is not a way of doing, it's a way of being. So before we jump into action, we need to think about who are we? What is our legacy in the world? What matters to us as human beings? Because, when we dig deep enough, we realize that all of us are connected through conscious equality. And this is something that we all actually care about. And so get real for a second, connect to your authentic self, connect to what's important to you, and look at what it looks like to walk the talk in your own life. Whether it's stopping your neighbor to have a chat because you've never actually taken the time to do that, or whether it's inviting somebody that's in your friendship group that you've never actually invited to your parties or dinners or your Zoom parties at the moment. Just take one action, right? Like at the end of the day, and I built this into my career, by the way, is what is one thing I can do today? So take that with you. What is one step you can take that you didn't take yesterday or the day before? And just build on it. And you'll find over a few months and over a lifetime, you will be a transformed person just by taking one step.
Just take one step. That's wonderful. Thank you again so much, Karen. I'm so, so glad again that you were able to join me today. And I can't wait to see what happens next with your podcast and your programs. And you're going to make so many amazing changes happen in this world. Thank you for all the work you do. And thank you again for being on the podcast.
And thank you for having me as a guest. And, I've been looking at podcasting for almost 3 years now, and you were the person I signed up with, right? So there's something amazing about who you are and how you show up and what you stand for, which is why we're working together. So I just want people who are considering putting their voice out there and considering sharing their knowledge with the world to really understand how special and amazing you are too.
Oh my gosh, I did not pay Karen to say that, I swear.
No, you didn't.
That's so kind of you. Thank you. What a nice thing to say. Okay, we'll leave it there. Have a fantastic afternoon and Friday. That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.